Okay, let's just go ahead and do it. Let's go ahead and refute this stupid article by Matt Zwolinski, 6 Reasons Libertarians Should Reject the Non-Aggression Principle. I know, about 1 million people have refuted it before me, but I am sick and tired of having this thrown in my face by unintellectual know-nothings who can't even respond to basic logic, as if the mere existence of this oft-refuted article destroys everything I'm saying. Well, first of all, it's important to understand what the NAP is, so I'm linking to my video, Libertarianism and Property Rights from First Principles. Please watch that before this. That way you'll understand the logical grounding for the non-aggression principle and for property rights from first principles. The logical first principles. The principles of Socrates. The law of non-contradiction and the consistency principle. The same principles that got us to the moon and put a robot on a comet and came up with vaccines for polio. All of that stuff. First principles that you can't deny. And this is an unbroken chain of logic stemming from that. Okay, so once you watch that, you now understand the logical basis for the non-aggression principle. So let's go through this. Many libertarians believe that the whole of their political philosophy can be summed up in a single simple principle. This principle, the non-aggression principle, or non-aggression axiom, hereafter NAP, holds that aggression against the person or property of others is always wrong, where aggression is defined narrowly in terms of the use or threat of physical violence. There we are, right in the first paragraph, outright lie. As you can see from my video, it is not defined in any such narrow way. And as we'll see, he goes on and denies outright that this includes fraud when it absolutely does. So he goes on to talk about, and then the rest of libertarianism can be deduced as a matter of logic. Well, the whole thing is because we come there from first principles. So a little lower he says, but the NAP's plausibility is superficial. It is, of course, common sense to think that aggression is a bad thing, but it is far from common sense to think that badness is absolute, such that the wrongness of aggression always trumps any other possible consideration of justice or political morality. There is a vast difference between a strong but defeasible presumption against the justice of aggression. It's not a presumption, it's a conclusion drawn by logic from first principles. As Brian Kaplan has said, if you can't think of counterexamples to the latter, you're not trying hard enough. Doesn't matter. Counterexamples don't matter. Logic from first principles. Alright? So unless you can find a problem with the logic, some sort of fallacy I committed when I made that video, or some step that I skipped, or if you really want to go absolutely crazy and refute the first principles themselves, other than that, that's all you can do with an argument from first principles. That's all you can do. Right? So he goes over his 6 reasons. 1, prohibits all pollution. No, it doesn't. It just means that if you're going to pollute someone's property, then you have to get permission from the property owner. And if you pollute someone's property without permission, what happens? Well, if they want to do anything about it, then they'd have to go with whatever system is set up to do that. I'm going to go completely ANCAP here and say DROs. So they'll go to their DRO, and you'd have to be able to show evidence that this person polluted and how much they had done it. And when you're talking about stuff like, he even mentions burning wood in one's fireplace or smoking or things like that. That amount of pollution on someone else's property is going to be such a tiny amount that it's not going to be worth anyone doing that. It's only going to be the big things. And besides, it's not like you burn wood in your fireplace, your neighbor burns wood in his fireplace, and then that kind of cancels each other out, right? So, yeah. This hasn't been thought through. 2, prohibits small harms for large benefits. No, it prohibits small harms for large benefits without the permission of the people you're harming. And as I just said, if the harm is small enough, then it probably won't be worth their efforts to go and counteract it. 3 is all or nothing attitude towards risk. The NAP clearly implies that it's wrong for me to shoot you in the head. But to borrow an example from David Friedman, what if I merely run the risk of shooting you by putting one bullet in a 6-shot revolver, spinning the cylinder, aiming at your head, and squeezing the trigger? It's still aggression. What are you, 2? Is this really a question? If I didn't have anything to say about undergoing that risk, it's aggression. Duh! We run this risk when we drive on the highway. What if we suffer a heart attack or become distracted? Or when we fly airplanes over populated areas? Yes, you are running the risk of doing harm to other people. And if it does turn out that you end up doing harm to other people, you're responsible for that. You hit someone with your car, you have to pay their medical bills. You have to pay for the amount of time they weren't able to work and make money. Has he ever done any actual living in society? That's what I want to know. No, this is not about what you are absolutely prohibited from doing. It's about what you're responsible for. It's about responsibility. Why don't people get that? 4. No prohibition of fraud. Lie, 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 lie. Libertarians usually say that violence may legitimately be used to prevent either force or fraud. That's right, they do, so why are you pretending otherwise? But according to Knapp, the only legitimate use of force is to prevent or punish the initiatory use of physical violence by others. No, it isn't. Already covered that. Follow the logic from first principles. If I tell you that the painting you want to buy is a genuine Renoir, and it's not, I have not physically aggressed against you. Alright, let's think about this. Where did I get the money to buy that Renoir? Let's assume I didn't steal it or anything. I worked for it. My labor is tied to that money. That money represents the fruits of my labor. If you steal the money from me, if you point a gun to my head and say, give me the money or I'll shoot you, and I give you the money, I think we all agree that's a violation of the net. Well, who knows? This Schmendrick probably wouldn't, with all the crazy things he's excluding, but most reasonable people are going to say, yeah, that's a violation of the NAP. Why? Because he took the fruits of my labor. Okay, so how is it any different? He sells me this painting that he claims is genuine, and it isn't. He is still taking the fruits of my labor. The only legitimate way to do that is if we contract, and that's what we have the appearance of doing. Here's a genuine Renoir, here's the money, we do the exchange, and everybody's happy. But if it's not a genuine Renoir, then you have not fulfilled the terms of the contract. You have violated the contract and therefore have violated the NAP. You have taken the fruits of my labor just as if you'd put the gun to my head. But if you buy it, find out it's a fake, and then send the police or your protective agency over to my house to get your money back, then you are aggressing against me. No! No! Has this guy put any thought into this? Okay, go back to the gun thing. You point the gun to my head, take my money, and I send the people from my DRO over to your house to get my money back. As long as they are only doing what is necessary to retrieve my stolen property, as long as they don't go beyond that, then it's not aggression. It's a response to your aggression. Well, again, as I just showed, it's no different than with a fake Renoir. So yeah, in a case like that, it's not aggression to go and get the money back. Because you promised something for that money and did not deliver on your promise. Now, more realistically, what would happen is that my DRO would contact your DRO and they'd work it out that way. But, going with the analogy that you presented, then it's absolutely, the aggression is yours, not mine, if that happens. So, not only does a prohibition on fraud not follow from the NAP, yes it does, it's not even compatible with it. Why? Because you say so? Since the use of force to prohibit fraud itself constitutes the initiation of physical violence. No, the fraud is the initiation. 5. Parasitic on a theory of property. Remember, my video covered property rights as well. Even if the NAP is correct, it cannot serve as a fundamental principle of libertarian ethics because its meaning and normative force are entirely parasitic on an underlying theory of property. No, the theory of property derives from the NAP, as I showed. Suppose A is walking across an empty field when B jumps out of the bushes and clubs A on the head. It certainly looks like B is aggressing against A in this case, but on the libertarian view, whether this is so depends entirely on the relevant property rights, specifically who owns the field. If it's B's field and A was crossing it without B's consent, then A was the only one who was actually aggressing against B. Well, no, because remember, you don't get to use any more force than is necessary to correct the violation. So the first thing to do is, hey, you're on my property, please leave. And if he doesn't leave, then you can accelerate and do normal things. But, you're on my property, therefore I get to grab you and take you into my house and rape you or whatever. No. You only get to do what is necessary. Once you go beyond that, you become an aggressor. All from first principles. Just think it through. Thus, aggression, on the libertarian view, doesn't really mean physical violence at all. It means violation of property rights. Those are the same thing. Physical violence is a violation of property rights because you own yourself. You have self-ownership. So if you take a baseball bat to my kitchen table, that's aggression against my property. If you take a baseball bat to my head, that's an aggression against my property as well, because my head is my property. Again, all logically flowing. The NAP leads to self-ownership. Self-ownership leads to property rights. So you see what he's done by artificially limiting the NAP to violence. He's used this as a justification for all these points, that as soon as you realize that the NAP doesn't just refer to physical violence, but can refer to the threat of violence or fraud or things like that, then you see what he's pulling here. And of course, number 6, what about the children? It's one thing to say that aggression against others is wrong. It's quite another to say that it's the only thing that's wrong. Well, who does that? Or the only wrong thing that is properly subject to prevention or rectification by force. Well, if you think that something that isn't an initiation of force should be prevented or rectified by force, how do you apply that under the consistency principle? It's like I said in the video. What if you're saying, oh, well, this deserves to have force used against them from this, even though there's no force going on, you use force, someone else tries to use force to stop you. How do you complain about that? How do you have any consistency in complaining about the person who's going to use force to stop you from doing that? The NAP implies that there is nothing wrong with allowing your 3-year-old son to starve to death. Oh boy, here we go. Has this guy read any libertarian philosophy? The son has self-ownership. So does the parent. The parent is under no obligation. The parent is not the slave of the son. The parent doesn't have to do any of that. But since the parent is trustee owner of the child, if the parent refuses to undergo the responsibilities of that position, then the parent has abrogated that position, and it would not be aggression in that case to remove the child from the situation. And therefore also would not be aggression to do only what is necessary to accomplish that goal. Even if it's breaking into the house, if it's necessary to break into the house to take the child, then that's what's justifiable. There's more to be said about each of these, of course. Libertarians haven't written much about the issue of pollution. What? Okay, he hasn't read many libertarians. Jeez, let's see. At least 2 books by Harry Brown, Why Government Doesn't Work, the Great Libertarian Author. Mary Ruwart's book, Healing Our World, covers it quite at length. I've made several videos on it. God. He's just a liar! That's all there is to it. This cannot be a simple mistake. It cannot be a simple misunderstanding. It must be outright lies. Libertarians are ingenious folk, and I have no doubt that, given sufficient time, they can think up a host of ways to tweak, tinker, and contextualize the NAP in a way that makes some progress in dealing with the problems I've raised in this essay. Aha! Did you spot it? The poisoning the well fallacy. Before we get to make our responses, he's already written them off as tweaking and tinkering, and not an unbroken logical argument from first principles. So, he knows this. He knows this. I mean, even if he believes it, it's just belief in belief. Otherwise, he wouldn't have written that sentence. Otherwise, he wouldn't have felt that he had to try and discredit what we're going to say ahead of time by doing this kind of advanced straw man against it, which is really what a poisoning the well fallacy is. But there comes a point where adding another layer of epicycles to one's theory no longer seems the best way to proceed. Don't have to. Don't have to. Unbroken chain of logic from first principles. All I need. All I need. There comes a point where what you need is not another refinement of the definition of aggression, but a radical paradigm shift in which we put aside the idea that non-aggression is the sole immovable center of the moral universe. Okay, well, come up with something if you want. That's fine. But you have to be able to justify it from first principles. If you cannot justify your alternative from an unbroken chain of logic from first principles, then you can't use it to overturn the nap. And even if you could, that alone wouldn't do it. I mean, it would mean that whatever it was and the nap could coexist. I mean, that's fine, bring it forward. But no. You're not saying, oh, we need something else alongside the nap. You're saying libertarians should reject the nap. That's what you're saying. So hopefully everyone sees why this is wrong and no one should pay any attention to it at all. So please stop sending it to me. Please stop posting it in the comments as if it's some big trump card when you haven't even bothered to take 16 minutes out of your miserable life to watch that video and learn what it actually says. 16 minutes long. That's all it is. 16 minutes. And you can destroy all of that. If you can't even be bothered to actually understand what libertarian philosophy is, then where the hell do you get off trying to refute it?